In this video, I'll be introducing you to your paintbrush tool, which is the fifth tool down on the right side of your toolbar, and its associated brush panel, which can be found here. Okay, you'll see that the icon looks like a little cup holding a number of brushes. Now, before using your paintbrush, I want to make sure you understand that the color that your paintbrush uses is coming from whatever your stroke is assigned to. So think of these as open paths, again, which would have a stroke assigned to them. And in this case, again, my stroke is set to black. The width of your brush comes from your stroke setting. So you'll see here that my stroke is currently set to 1 point. So when I swipe over my artboard, okay, I get a fairly small stroke. And you'll also see that again, that it is set to black. One other note is that when I stroke across my board, you'll see that the line is not smooth. Okay, you see sort of like the blobs of my brush, maybe the shakiness of my hand. But when I release the mouse, Illustrator automatically smooths that out for me. Okay, so again, basics of the paintbrush tool. To take it further, I'm going to open my brush panel and you're going to see a number of default settings. So we've got some basic uniform brushes. So there's a few round ones, a few oval, you've got a flat, and then a calligraphy brush. And then you have different styles of appearances associated with them. So for instance, I have a charcoal feather, and if I were to brush that over, you'll see that that is distinctly different from my basic brush. And then you have a few other little oddballs that default for one reason or another. Okay, this one, for instance, looks like stitches on denim. Okay, no idea why that's a default, but it is. And then you've got loads of others that you can choose from. So if you come down to the bottom where you see these little books, okay, this is your brush libraries. And if you open this up, you should have most of these folders, okay? You probably, well, you don't have Aquario because that's something I have a license to. You may or may not have Wacom brushes, okay? I think I have this because I have a Wacom tablet. And then vector packs, I have a few packs that I've either purchased or downloaded previously. But you should have everything in between. Okay, so the ones that students typically love to play with are some of these artistic. And so I'll open up artistic and maybe I'll come over and grab watercolor. And you'll see that when you choose to open anything from your library, you're going to get a separate window. And all of those categories also have many brushes for you to play with. Okay, so again, it's just going to change the style of my brush. That's at 1 point. I can try it again a little bit thicker. Okay, and you'll see the difference between these. I can try another one. Okay, and you'll see at 3 point that's not super attractive, so I'm going to backtrack to 1 point and see what that looks like. Okay. Now I'm going to clear the decks a little bit. I'm going to grab my black arrow and just hit delete. And I'll also go ahead and change the color of my stroke because you're seeing this in black. It's rendering in gray, obviously, because it's watercolor. But if I choose a brighter pink, you'll see what that looks like, okay, and why these watercolor brushes tend to be pretty popular with students for your pattern project. Okay, I'll go in and look for another set of brushes, maybe decorative this time. Let's see what's in scatter. Okay, so you see all of these shapes, not the best choices. I'll go in again, maybe look at some of the bristle brushes. Play with something that looks a little bit different, adds a little bit more of a variation in color, maybe a little bit of grain. And again, maybe just one more. I tend to like most of the artistic. All right, you'll see how different these look. And again, you'll get an understanding of what they should look like if you hover. Obviously, you have a couple of calligraphy brushes. I've got a fire ash that obviously is giving more of a painterly scatter effect. Okay, and I just want to reiterate that all of these are options to use within your prints. So perhaps you really like this sort of scattered paint effect. This may look really awesome placed behind your icons for a little contrast of color, a little bit of interest, perhaps without getting really, really busy. Okay. So once again, black arrow, and I'm just going to hover over all of these and eliminate them. Okay. And so again, as I showcase these to you, these may just be little embellishments, flourishes that you want to add behind your icon. but you can add them to your icon as well. And so I'm going to switch over to where I have a couple icons placed on an artboard. And again, I can come over and select, okay? Come over and simply apply this charcoal feather to my icon to see what that looks like. Okay, perhaps that is effective for your culture and sort of the overlying feeling you're going for. I could try something else. This is a little bit thicker, maybe something with a different kind of grain to it. Okay, definitely a different feel here. Okay, obviously if I play with these scatters, those aren't going to work super well here. I'm getting a really sort of crazy effect with that. But I can come in again, look again for something a little bit different. These are going to be images, maybe come into a different bristle, which I've already used. So I guess I'll go back to artistic, maybe try a calligraphy pen this time. Okay, and you can see depending on the direction of the brush, I'm getting a different appearance. Okay, and this is set to 1 stroke, so it's a little thick. I can still narrow that down. Remember, your stroke can go down to a 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch, and you can find something that works for your particular culture and the output you're looking for. And so obviously this is pretty straightforward, applying these strokes to your icon. But again, you can get as inventive with this as you want. So in this case, rather than applying anything to my icon, I'll go ahead and change the color. And maybe I'll thicken up my stroke a little bit. And I'll grab a watercolor brush that looks interesting. Okay. And I need to change my stroke again because it defaulted back to 1. And this time maybe I will just color in the background. Again, I need to make sure I'm actually on my brush when I'm making these changes. I was on my move tool. Okay, and I have my moon selected, which is not actually what I was going for at all. So I'm going to backtrack to black here. Okay, one more time. I'm going to make sure I deselect. I'm going to grab my brush tool. I'm going to set it to pink. I will choose a brush and I will thicken up my stroke. All right, this should work this time. And what I'm going to do is simply brush back and forth across my moon. Okay, that's a little thick. So I can come over with my black arrow and select it, and I'll just thin that out a little bit so it looks more like paintbrushes. Paintbrush strokes, I should say. And maybe I'll just arrange it to the back. Okay. So now I've got sort of a flourish of color behind my moon. Okay, and I'm not loving this paintbrush, so I can still come through and sort of look for something else that more or less connects to what my goal was. And again, in this instance, I just wanted to add some painterly strokes behind my icon. Okay, and maybe we'll say that that was what I was hoping to gain from this. I'll go ahead and select my icon, and I'll thicken up the stroke. Okay, and you can see what that looks like if I have an icon that maybe is contrasting a little bit more to the color that I've placed behind it. So again, that's something else that you may consider doing. One other note that I do want to point out is I'll go ahead and just copy and paste quickly the star. I'm going to thin this out. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to simply select this star. And actually, maybe I'll size this down a little bit too. I'll make it smaller, maybe really small. Make sure you hold Shift as you size it down to make sure you constrain the proportions. And while it's active, again, here on my brush panel, if you come down to the bottom, you'll see that you have this button to add a new brush. So you can create your own brushes. I'll go ahead and hit the plus symbol. And there's a lot of choices here. So for instance, if I choose something like bristle brush, the shape of my brush will be a star, and it'll still look like a paintbrush. It just gives it a different effect. In this instance, I'm going to be super, super literal because we're working on a pattern project, and I'll choose the pattern brush, and I'll go ahead and hit OK. And you're going to see that you get a number of options here. So you can affect, for instance, how much spacing is between all of the icons. And you can see them sort of moving as I increase that. You can, adjust things like scale in some instances and flip and fit, things like that. But I'm just going to go ahead and hit OK for the time being. I'll make sure I'm on that brush. Okay, and you already see that I accidentally applied that to my star. And what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to grab my paintbrush tool. I'll make sure I'm on the star brush that I've just created. And now I can run that across the page. So again, you may have an idea around using this moon and you traced the star, but you don't like them together as you've traced them and you're trying to think of something different. Again, you might try running some paintbrush patterns across your pattern, okay, or the print that you're developing to see if that doesn't add some interest or achieve something that's just a little different than maybe what you set out to do initially, okay? In addition to everything that I've discussed in this video, you also can add brushes. So again, here you obviously see I've got a couple of licenses in place that are giving me some additional choices. You can save the brushes that you create, and so you can share them with your friends. You can also go to something like Other Library and upload brushes that you have found on the internet. Okay, generally you can put them in this folder. You also can use your libraries to achieve the same thing. So in this instance, you'll see I have a couple of brush sets that I downloaded but are not available to me in Illustrator. They were designed for Photoshop. And so if I come over to Photoshop to show you what these look like, I've got these Adobe with Keith Haring brush sets. And there's an assortment of different things here. So I have a paintbrush effect, or spray paint effect, I should say. I've got to make sure I'm actually on that. That gives me that kind of look. One of my favorites is one of these drips. So you'll see I can add these really cool drip lines. Okay, which would also be really fun behind an icon within a print. So if that's something you're interested in, you would need to do some of your work in Photoshop and then import it into Illustrator. You also see that there are decorative sets. So I've got these Halloween brushes that I downloaded, and some of these are super fun. I love this little Meow Meow, which I'll actually make a little bit smaller here. Okay, you'll see that I get this repeating cat motion. And as I turn, the cats kind of change direction, and you'll even see they sort of shift in size and shape just a little bit. So these are just really, really fun to play with. And if this is something that you enjoy sort of exploring, I would encourage you to go out to Adobe. You'll see create.adobe.com. There are a number of brush sets here that you can play with. I do want you to note most of these were designed for Photoshop. So again, it's something that you would need to play with in Photoshop and then bring into Illustrator if you choose to. But again, it can be a really fun way to add some personality, some interest, some variation in color. Again, this pink that I used when I selected that was a much darker pink, but when it's rendered in watercolor, it goes lighter. So it is one way to sort of cheat the system when it comes to the limitation of colors on your project.